Welcome to episode number 60 of Hoop Talk Fanatics. We are here with a special guest, Indiana men's basketball reporter and writer, Jack Ankony. And I'm really interested to hear his thoughts on last night's game, which took place at Jersey Mike's Arena. And welcome on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Pretty rough game for Indiana last night, but definitely a lot to talk about, and interesting kind of path Indiana has taken this season. But yeah, plenty to discuss about last night.
So my thoughts were my my first question is what went through your mind when Xavier Johnson got ejected?
Yeah, well, at first, so I didn't make the trip. I was just watching from home, so my my initial thought was I was confused because I just saw that he was the one that, fell to the ground. Woelfel kind of shoved him, and I was confused for a second. But then when they showed the replay, it was clear that, he kind of reached down there and, hit Woelfel, in a place you can't do without expecting to get some sort of flagrant. And yeah, there's really nothing you can argue against it. I thought it was the right call. It looked intentional. It looked like a pretty dirty play from Johnson. Um, and it was completely inexcusable for a sixth-year senior point guard to do something like that and to put his team in a position like that where you're on the road. I believe they were down by 4 at that time. So still a winnable game at that point. Um, Puts Indiana in a really tough position. He hadn't played well at all before that, too. He finished the game 2 points, 1 for 4 shooting, 5 turnovers, which really kind of, emphasizes what he's been since, in his 3 games back from injury. He had a similar effort at Nebraska, didn't score in that game, only played 14 minutes as they kind of worked him back, but had 4 turnovers. And then, Indiana comes back home to Ohio State. He scores 18 points, doesn't turn it over at all. And, looked like the Xavier Johnson from 2 seasons ago when he led Indiana kind of on that NCAA tournament push. Um, but then right when you think, oh, maybe he's figuring it out, plays one of his worst games and gets ejected at Rutgers and really kind of lets the team down with a silly and excusable play.
Definitely, yeah. Just that's it's a tough spot. You meant like veteran guard, you gotta, especially on the road in a tough atmosphere, tough environment. Like especially when you're not playing well, you don't. That's not how like when you're not playing well, you don't want to react like I mean, you don't react like that anyway. But you just because you're having a bad game, you gotta keep your emotions in check. Um,
Yeah.
like you kind of mentioned, like he's had a couple off games since returning from injury or whatnot. Is that something that concerns you a little bit moving forward for this team?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think this team has shown that it's basically 2 different teams. It's the team that shows up at home that behind a home crowd can have a lead against Kansas, who's ranked number 2 or 3 in the nation, I believe. Lead them for 35 minutes and, lose a close one where, it comes down to the last few plays at the end. They beat Ohio State at home, but then they go on the road and have a performance like they did against Rutgers, a performance like they did against Nebraska, where you turn the ball over 18 and 19 times. Um, you don't get anything from your senior point guard, Xavier Johnson. Trey Galloway, your other senior guard and team captain, doesn't play well. But yeah, I mean, I think Johnson is kind of the embodiment of kind of at least the last 3 games of what Indiana can be at home and can be on the road. And that's a big concern. Johnson has shown that he can be close to an all Big Ten type of caliber player, like his 2021-22 season when he was healthy. Was arguably Indiana's best player, like I mentioned, kind of down the stretch of that season. But last year before he got injured, had some up and down games, then missed pretty much the entire season. He comes back, gets hurt early again in this season, and when he comes back, he's just up and down. So not knowing what you're getting from him on a nightly basis is definitely a concern, because Mike Woodson will tell you that, you need your point guard to be able to run things offensively, and they've always kind of seen him. I think Woodson calls him kind of the head of the snake defensively, because he is a strong on-ball defender. He's kind of shown that throughout his career, and that's kind of where Indiana's defense starts. But when he has these inconsistent performances, and kind of inexcusable plays, it's really a concern moving forward.
I just wanted to mention that I just typed up the stats from last night's game, and I see Trey Galloway was 0 for 4 at the 3-point line. And I think that really made some big breaks from what they from what Indiana expected to see against Rutgers. And I I just think that he's a terrific shooter and should have been much better than that.
Yeah, Trey's been kind of difficult to figure out. His freshman and sophomore seasons, he didn't shoot the ball well. And then last year, it was pretty obvious that he made some technique tweaks with his 3-point shot, and ended up shooting about, I think, 46% from 3-point range last season. Given, it wasn't super high volume, but as kind of the fifth or sixth option offensively for last year's team. He was a knockdown shooter when, in kind of catch and shoot situations. And this year he's kind of fallen back to where he was his freshman and sophomore year. I think he's shooting about 24% from three this year. And I think even more concerning than his 3-point shooting is his free throw shooting. He was 0 for 2 last night, and that drops him to 50% from the free throw line on the year, which for a senior guard is pretty inexcusable. And I think free throw shooting is just a confidence thing. I think that's a mental thing. I think, I think players and coaches will all say free throw shooting is about feeling good about yourself when you step to the line, that you can knock down shots. And he's just not at that point. At this season, the 3-point shooting, I think, he'll have nights like this. I mean, I think Indiana needs him to maybe not be a super high volume guy, but if he can shoot 33% on limited attempts, I think that could be realistic. But yeah, not a great game from him. 4 for 13 overall. 2 turnovers is not terrible, but kind of speaks to the larger problems from Indiana last night. But yeah, Indiana needs more from their senior guards. Has kind of been a theme of a lot of losses this year, is that you're just not getting what you need from Johnson and Galloway.
Do you see a quick turnover in the going into the winning column for Indiana? I know they have a challenging one next game against Minnesota, and I think Minnesota can easily make it challenging for Indiana, especially with their offensive game. And I'm interested to see how Indiana can defend them.
Yeah, Minnesota definitely looks like they're improved from last season. I still think Indiana will be favored in that game, because it's a home game, and because Minnesota, maybe you could say they don't have a ton of outstanding wins on their resume, but definitely not a team Indiana can take lightly, especially after playing so poorly last night. I think, kind of like you mentioned, Minnesota seems like they've improved offensively this year, and Indiana kind of needs to focus on the defensive end, limiting them. They've got some pretty talented guards, I think. The one guy that transferred in from Howard this year has been good for them. One of their freshmen, Cam Christie, younger brother of Max Christie. So yeah, that'll be Indiana can't take them lightly. I think that's a game Indiana should win because it's at home, and kind of the other reasons I've mentioned. yeah.
Definitely, yeah. We talked about the guard play a lot, but there's been some inconsistency in the front court, but I definitely feel like the front court's been reliable and a lot more consistently, at least, especially where inside. What's impressed you with him, and I guess Renu and Mbako as well the most, and kind of how they've
Yeah,
developed
no,
this season?
yeah, no, that's definitely the strong suit of this team. I think Indiana can go into a lot of games thinking that they have an advantage in the front court. Not against every opponent, but I think certainly going into a lot of games they can think that way. And yeah, just kind of going through some of those guys where, he's got a lot of skills that some 7-footers don't. He can step out, knock down a three like he did last night. 17 rebounds, I'm pretty confident is a career high for him. I would have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's a career high. Um, he's a tremendous shot blocker kind of around the rim, and not even just blocking shots, but also kind of he's just altering shots with his long arms. Um, he's got pretty good touch around the rim. I think the concern with him is maybe how does he handle physicality all the time? I think in the Ohio State game, Ohio State out rebounded Indiana. It was like 49-27. And I think in that game, you kind of saw that game. Also, the UConn and Auburn losses, they had some bigs that were kind of able to be physical with Ware and kind of knock him off his spots offensively. Renew, I think, has been Indiana's best player this season. Um, Scored 13 last night, which is a little bit below his average, but career high 7 assists I saw. He's also really improved in terms of 3-point shooting. I know last night he was only 1 for 4, but I think he entered the game shooting like 47% on pretty significant attempts. He's not going to shoot, usually doesn't shoot 4 a game, but if he shoots 2 or 3, he's shot a pretty good percentage. And he's just so crafty around the rim. He's got great footwork, good touch. Had a really big game against Ohio State in that win, scored 23 points. So he's definitely, I think, taken one of the bigger freshman to sophomore jumps in the Big Ten. Um, and yeah, like I said, I would say he's been Indiana's best player this season.
Just the flip sides. What is your intake of Rutgers, and what do you think they like? How do you think they will perform the rest of the way once they reach conference tournament time?
Yeah, I don't think this is one of Pikel's better teams. I think just in terms of the guard play, I think it's taken a drop from the last few seasons when they had guys like, whether it's Caleb McConnell, Cam Spencer, Ron Harper Jr., Geo Baker. Like I don't think they have a guy, even Mulcahy. Like I don't think they have a guy quite like that on this year's team. I think Derek Simpson has potential, but he's still young and kind of developing. I thought Austin Williams for them played pretty well last night. He's a veteran, obviously been around. I think Noah Fernandez probably hasn't been as good as they would have liked getting him out of the portal. Um, and you look at Rutgers stats last night, they shoot 32% overall, 22% from 3-point range, 67% at the line. Like those
Mhm.
aren't numbers that win a lot of games. Um, Indiana just happened to play worse, I think, is kind of how it went. Um, I do think this Rutgers team has one of the better bigs in the conference in Cliff. I think he's shown he's an all Big Ten caliber center, really strong defensively. I think he's improved offensively throughout his career. I think it's an uphill battle for this team to make the tournament, just because of the guard play, like I mentioned. But they're gonna Jersey Mike's Arena has proven to be a tough place to play. They're going to play strong defense against everyone, so I think they'll win some home games. I don't know if they have enough offensive firepower for that to translate on the road. And just kind of, I think when you look at past Pikel teams, I just don't think this team quite has the offense and the guards to reach the NCAA tournament. There's obviously a lot of time left. That would just kind of be my take on them at this point.
Like uh just like it I'm trying to put it in words. Like besides the tournament, the regular tournament, how far do you think they go in the conference tournament?
Yeah, I think they could win a game or two. I don't think the Big Ten is particularly strong this year. I think Purdue is really good, national title contender. I think Illinois is good, but we'll see how they do if they don't have Terrence Shannon. That's a big question mark for them. Um, Michigan State, it seemed like they were starting to figure things out, but then they lost by about 15 or so points at Northwestern the other day.
Mhm.
So I think Wisconsin is better than last season. Ohio State, seemed like they were starting to play better, but then they just lost to Indiana, who we saw how Indiana played last night. So I think there's so many teams in the Big Ten that you don't know kind of what you're getting on a nightly basis. So I think Rutgers in terms of the Big Ten tournament, I expect them to finish maybe somewhere between, I don't know, 7th and 12th or 13th in the Big Ten. I think you can win a game in the conference tournament, just because those conference tournaments always seem to be pretty unpredictable and have a lot of upsets. So that'd be kind of my thoughts on kind of where they stand in the Big Ten.
Chris, you got anything?
Yeah, just one. So you talked about the Big Ten as a whole a little bit. If you had to pick one team outside of Purdue to really push them, which I don't think really happens in the standings, but I guess who do you think can really push for second in the Big Ten then, if you had to pick like your next best team?
Yeah, I think that would be between Illinois, Wisconsin, and it's hard to group Michigan State into that because they've been so up and down. But I guess at this point I would probably say Illinois or Wisconsin. Um, I think Wisconsin made one of the better transfer portal additions with AJ Storr, the guard they got from St. John's. He's been really good for them. I think Chucky Hepburn's been better. They got the veteran bigs. They'll play good. I think this is one of the better offensive teams Wisconsin has had in recent years. So um, if Illinois had Terrence Shannon, if I knew that they were going to have him for the rest of the year, I would definitively say them because I think he is probably the second best player in the Big Ten besides Edey and probably the best guard. But they've played all right without him, really. They gave Purdue a decent game at Purdue, which it was impressive. They beat Northwestern without Shannon. Um, so that's the big question with them. But I guess I would say those two teams I think probably have the best chance of pushing Purdue for that second spot in the Big Ten.
Uh, a question just came up in my mind. What what team do you think can actually have the shot to knock out Purdue in the conference tournament?
Yeah, so I mean I think Purdue is head and shoulders above the rest of the Big Ten right now, but I think maybe when you look at matchups, you probably want to pick a team that has, guards that play strong defense, guards that are physical,
Mhm.
to kind of that was kind of the formula of beating Purdue last season. Um, so I think Wisconsin, kind of like I mentioned, has some guards that could maybe do that. Older, bigger guards like AJ Storr, I think is like 6'6". Um, I think even Michigan State, the problem with them is I don't know how they handle Zach Edey, but um, you know, their guards too, I think can hang with Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer when you talk about Tyson Walker, AJ Hogard. Michigan State's just been too up and down this year to kind of really rely on them right now. Um, I think I think on a neutral site, Illinois showed that they can kind of hang with Purdue at Mackey. for certain stretches of that game. I think they give Purdue some problems with their size, not necessarily having a guy like that's 7'4" like Edey, but more of their size in terms of on the perimeter and kind of the wings. I think could maybe give Purdue some problems there. But at this point, I wouldn't feel good about about necessarily saying that anyone could beat Purdue, on a consistent basis. I know Nebraska just beat them pretty handily last night. I think that they shot really well from three. I think I question if they could do that on a neutral site or at Purdue. So that's kind of to be seen. I really think winning on the Big Ten is on the road is so difficult. Is why you see Purdue losing games like that at Nebraska, at Northwestern. We saw them do it last year, and they still earned a 1 seed. For example, we see Indiana play great at home and then terrible on the road, which kind of speaks to that. So I'm really not sure if anyone could beat Purdue in the Big Ten tournament at this point.
And my last question that I have is, what is your prediction for Indiana's record for the rest of the month and into February?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess looking through the schedule, I think they'll win Friday against Minnesota. I think that's one where you see a bounce back game, which may be hard to feel that way after last night, but I think they handle Minnesota. I think they'll lose to Purdue at home. I think they'll lose those 2 road games next at Wisconsin, at Illinois. I think they could beat Iowa and Penn State at home. I don't think either of those teams are particularly good this season. So that takes you into the first week of February. Then you have at Ohio State. I think that one's kind of a toss-up given that IU beat them at home just a few days ago. I think so. Indiana right now is 3-2 in the Big Ten. I think they're gonna finish right around 500 in conference play. You know, I think they'll win enough home games that's possible. I think their ceiling maybe is like 12 conference wins. Their floor maybe 8 or so. I kind of see them in that range.
How many quad one wins do they have?
I would have to double check. I think Ohio State might be their only quad one win.
Okay.
All of their non-conference, their big non-conference games were UConn, Auburn, and Kansas, and they lost all of those. The Kansas one would have been really good to pick up, I think, for their tournament resume. But yeah, I think it's I guess I'm not sure what winning at Michigan does. But I know that just since that's a road game, wins are weighted more heavily in terms of the net. Let's see if we can pull this up. I think it might just be that Ohio State game though. Yeah, this says. So this actually says Indiana's 0-4 in quad one wins. So I guess the Ohio State game is no longer a quad one win. I think at the time it might have been. I think at the time when they beat Michigan, I think that was a quad one win. But that was over a month ago at this point, and Michigan has really fallen apart. So yeah, Indiana does not have a great resume right now, and it'll be kind of hard to build up a lot of quad one wins before the tournament.
It's definitely going to be an interesting rest of the way, and we thank you, Jack, for coming on and talking IU hoops, and hope to have you back on soon.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Definitely. Thanks, Jack.
All right, see you guys.
Thank you. See ya.